Jake Murphy's head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. He opened his eyes slowly and saw a ceiling made of strange metal that glowed with a soft blue light. The air smelled different too, like burning plastic mixed with something sweet. That made his nose wrinkle. He tried to sit up, but his whole body ached. His Marine uniform was torn in several places and dried blood covered his left arm. Jake remembered the fight on New Dakota. The aliens had come from the sky in ships that looked like giant insects. They had weapons that shot beams of light instead of bullets. Most of his squad was dead. Jake looked around and realized he was in some kind of prison cell. The walls were smooth and white, and there were no windows. A thin line of energy ran along one wall, probably some kind of force field, keeping him inside. The cell was huge, much bigger than any human prison cell he had ever seen. It was big enough to hold an elephant, maybe two. Strange sounds came from the dark corners of the cell, low growling noises that made the hair on his arms stand up. Something was breathing heavily in the shadows, something big. Jake's training kicked in. He stayed very still and listened carefully. There were at least 3 different breathing patterns, 3 different creatures sharing this cell with him. Footsteps echoed from outside the cell. Jake looked up and saw his captors approaching. They looked like giant cats that walked on 2 legs. They had gray fur, yellow eyes, and wore uniforms covered in symbols he could not read. One of them was bigger than the others and had scars across his face. The big one spoke in perfect English, which surprised Jake. "Ah, the primitive human is awake. I am Warden Krixtal of the Zephyrian Empire. You are now a prisoner on Kepler. Station our most secure facility." Jake said nothing. In the Marines, they taught you to give only your name, rank, and serial number. But something told him these aliens already knew everything they wanted to know about him. Krixtal laughed, showing sharp teeth. "You humans think you are so tough. Your little colony on New Dakota fought bravely. I will give you that. But you are nothing special, just another primitive species that thinks violence makes them strong." One of the other aliens, this one smaller with white stripes in his fur, pointed at Jake and made a sound like purring. "Warden, should we put him with the other humans?" "No," Krixtal said, his yellow eyes getting brighter. "This one killed 12 of our soldiers before we caught him. He deserves special treatment. He will stay here with our most dangerous prisoners." Jake felt his stomach drop. The breathing sounds in the shadows got louder, like the creatures could smell his fear. But Marines don't show fear, so Jake kept his face blank and stared right back at Krixtal. "You see, human, we have been fighting a war against the Drakmori for 50 years. They are savage beasts who breathe fire and have no honor. We captured these 3 during our last battle on their home world. They have been here for 10 years, growing more angry and hungry every day." Krixtal pressed something on his wrist, and the force field flickered. "We were going to execute them, but now we have a better idea. You will provide entertainment. Let us see how tough humans really are when faced with real monsters." The shadows in the corner of the cell began to move. Jake heard the scrape of claws on metal and saw glowing eyes reflecting the blue light from the ceiling. His heart started beating faster, but he forced himself to breathe slowly and stay calm. The first creature stepped into the light and Jake had to stop himself from stepping backward. It looked like a dragon from old Earth stories, but it was real and it was huge. 12 feet tall with dark red scales that looked like armor. Its head was the size of a garbage can and filled with teeth like kitchen knives. Wings folded against its back and a long tail with spikes at the end dragged behind it. 2 more dragons emerged from the shadows. One was smaller with green scales and bright orange eyes. The third was older looking with gray mixed into its black scales and scars covering its arms and chest. All 3 of them stared at Jake like he was their next meal. "The big one is called Vorthak," Krixtal said, enjoying himself. "He was their war chief before we captured him. The green one is Gendrick, still young but very aggressive. The old one is Morthul. He has killed more Zephyrians than any other Drakmori." Jake studied each dragon carefully. Vorthak moved like a soldier, with purpose and control. Gendrix kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, like he wanted to attack but was waiting for permission. Morthul just watched everything with intelligent eyes that reminded Jake of his old sergeant back on Earth. "They have not eaten fresh meat in 3 days," Crixtal continued. "We thought they might enjoy human. Your species is supposed to taste better than most." The force field disappeared completely. Jake was now in the same space as 3 hungry dragons who had every reason to hate anything connected to their captors. The smart thing would be to run to the far corner and try to stay alive as long as possible. Instead, Jake did something that surprised everyone watching. He sat down cross-legged on the floor and closed his eyes like he was meditating. He had learned this trick from an old martial arts instructor. When facing a dangerous animal, never show fear and never run. Running triggers their hunting instincts. Vorthak took a step forward, his claws clicking on the metal floor. Jake could smell his breath, hot and smoky. But Jake stayed perfectly still and kept breathing slowly and evenly. The dragons looked confused. They had expected screaming and running and begging for mercy. Instead, this small human was acting like he belonged here, like he was not afraid of them at all. Crixtal's confident smile began to fade as he watched through the observation window. This was not going according to plan. Jake sat on the cold metal floor for what felt like hours. The 3 dragons circled him slowly, but none of them attacked. Vorthak, the biggest one, kept getting closer and then backing away, like he was trying to figure out what kind of creature Jake was. From his training, Jake knew that most predators worked in groups with clear leaders. Wolves had alphas. Lions had pride leaders. These dragons probably worked the same way. Vorthak was clearly the boss, but he was confused by Jake's behavior. Finally, Vorthak made his move. The huge dragon charged forward with his claws extended, and his mouth open, showing rows of sharp teeth. Jake could have rolled away or tried to run, but instead he did something that surprised everyone. He stepped to the side at the last second like a bullfighter avoiding a bull. Vorthak's momentum carried him past Jake and into the wall. The dragon hit the metal with a loud crash that echoed through the cell. Jake immediately moved to help Vorthak stand up. He put his hand on the dragon's arm and made calming sounds, the same way he might help a teammate who had fallen during training. Vorthak stared at Jake with wide eyes, clearly not understanding why this small human was helping him instead of running away or attacking. The other 2 dragons, Gendrix and Morthul, moved closer. They made low rumbling sounds that might have been talking, but Jake could not understand their language. Their heads moved up and down like they were nodding to each other. Jake's stomach growled loudly. He had not eaten since before the battle on New Dakota, and that felt like days ago. He reached into his torn uniform pocket and found an energy bar that had somehow survived the fight. It was squashed and covered in dirt, but it was food. Instead of eating it himself, Jake broke the energy bar into 4 pieces. He ate 1 small piece and offered the other 3 to the dragons. This was a big risk. If they saw him as prey, sharing food might make them more aggressive. But if they were intelligent, they might understand that he was showing respect. Vorthak sniffed the piece of energy bar that Jake held out to him. Then he ate it in 1 bite. The other dragons did the same. Jake smiled and nodded, the same way he would thank a friend for sharing lunch. Over the next few hours, Jake watched everything the dragons did. He noticed that they communicated with more than just sounds. Their scales changed color slightly when they were angry or calm. Vorthak's scales got darker when he was thinking hard. Gendrix's scales flickered orange when he was excited. Morthul's scales stayed mostly the same, but his tail moved differently depending on his mood. Jake also noticed that they were not mindless beasts like Crixtal had said. When Gendrix accidentally knocked over a water container, Morthul fixed it without being asked. When Vorthak sat down to rest, the other 2 automatically positioned themselves to watch different parts of the cell. These were warriors who had fought together for a long time. The dragons started making more sounds at Jake, and he realized they were trying to talk to him. He listened carefully and tried to repeat some of their words. When he got a word right, their scales would brighten slightly. When he got it wrong, they would patiently repeat it until he understood. After many attempts, Jake learned that the word Thrak meant friend and Korvac meant enemy. When the dragons pointed at the walls and said Korvac, Jake understood. They were talking about their captors. When they pointed at him and said Thrak, Jake felt something warm in his chest. They were accepting him as one of their group. Outside the cell, Krixtal watched through the observation window with growing concern. His assistant, the white-striped Zephyrian named Jorak, kept checking the monitoring equipment. "Warden, this is not what we expected," Jorak said nervously. "The human should be dead by now. Instead, he appears to be communicating with the prisoners." "Impossible," Krixtal growled. "The Drakmori are savage beasts. They do not make friends with their food." But even as he said it, Krixtal could see that something had changed in the cell. The dragons were calmer than they had been in years. They were not pacing or roaring or trying to break the walls. Instead, they were sitting around the human, like he was their pack leader. Jake had figured out that the dragons had been prisoners for 10 years. 10 years of being locked in this cell with nothing to do and no hope of escape. He could see it in their eyes, the same look he had seen in prisoners of war. They had given up. But Jake had not given up. He started exercising, doing push-ups, and sit-ups on the floor of the cell. The dragons watched with interest. When Jake started doing jumping jacks, Gendrix tried to copy him, which looked very funny because of his size and tail. Soon all 3 dragons were trying to do human exercises. They could not do them very well, but they were laughing, making sounds that Jake realized were the dragon version of laughter. For the first time in years, they were having fun. Jake also started teaching them English words. He would point at objects and say their names. Wall, floor, water, food. The dragons were quick learners, and soon they could say simple words in his language. Morthal was the smartest of the 3. He figured out that Jake was a soldier like they had been. He showed Jake scars on his arms and chest, and Jake showed him the scars he had gotten in battles on other planets. They could not speak each other's languages well yet, but they understood the language of warriors. At feeding time, the Zephyrians pushed food through a slot in the wall. It was some kind of gray paste that tasted terrible. Jake noticed that. Gendrix, the youngest dragon, always got the smallest portion. Without being asked, Jake gave half of his food to Gendrix. Vorthak saw this and made a sound that Jake was beginning to recognize as approval. In dragon culture, apparently, the leader was supposed to make sure everyone in the group had enough to eat. By feeding Gendrix, Jake was acting like a real pack leader. That night, when the lights in the cell dimmed, Jake found that he was not alone. The 3 dragons had arranged themselves around him while he slept, like bodyguards protecting their leader. For the first time since his capture, Jake felt safe. Krixtal stared at the security monitors in disbelief. Somehow, in just one day, this human had done something that 10 years of imprisonment had not accomplished. He had given the dragons hope. Jake had been in the cell for 5 days when he learned the dragon's real story. Morthal, the old warrior, had gotten better at speaking English. He told Jake that the Drakmori were not savage beasts at all. They were space travelers and explorers who had lived peacefully on their homeworld for thousands of years. "We fight only when attacked," Morthal explained, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Zephyrians came to our world. They wanted our metals, our crystals. We said no. They attacked our cities." Jake listened while working on a project. He had been collecting small pieces of metal from their food containers and broken parts of the cell walls. Using techniques he learned in marine engineering training, he was making simple tools: a scraper from a bent piece of metal, a small hammer from a chunk of broken wall material tied to a piece of cloth from his uniform. Vorthak watched Jake work and made appreciative sounds. "You are builder?" he said in broken English. "Dragons are builders too. We make great cities on our world, beautiful towers that reach the sky." "What happened to your cities?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Gendrix's scales turned dark red with anger. "Zephyrians burn them, kill our families, take our children as slaves." His English was getting better every day, but his voice shook with emotion. Jake felt a familiar anger building in his chest. It was the same feeling he got when bullies picked on smaller kids, or when he heard about terrorists attacking innocent people. Humans had a strong reaction to injustice, and this was definitely injustice. "How many of your people are still alive?" Jake asked. "Not many," Morthul said sadly. "Maybe few hundred, hidden in caves and mountains. Zephyrians hunt them like animals." That night, Jake shared stories from Earth's history. He told them about the American Revolution, when a small group of farmers defeated the most powerful army in the world. He told them about World War II, when people from many countries worked together to stop an evil empire. He told them about small groups of Marines holding off much larger enemy forces through courage and smart tactics. "Size does not matter," Jake explained. "Numbers do not matter. What matters is never giving up and fighting smart instead of fighting hard." The dragons listened to every word. Jake could see something changing in their eyes. The hopelessness was fading, replaced by something else, something dangerous. "You think we can escape?" Vorthak asked. "I think we can do more than escape," Jake said. "I think we can win." The next morning brought trouble. A group of Zephyrian guards came to the cell during feeding time. Their leader was a big Zephyrian with black stripes and mean eyes. Jake had seen his type before in the military, bullies who enjoyed hurting people weaker than themselves. "The human looks healthy," the guard leader said in English, clearly wanting Jake to understand. "Too healthy." Guards stunned the big dragon, full power. Two guards pointed their energy weapons at Vorthak. Jake knew from experience that those weapons hurt badly even on low settings. On full power, they could kill. But they were not aiming at Jake. They were aiming at his friend. What happened next surprised everyone, including Jake himself. Without thinking, he threw himself in front of Vorthak just as the guards fired their weapons. The energy beams hit Jake in the chest and back. Pain exploded through his body like he had been hit by lightning. Every muscle seized up and he fell to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. His vision went white and he could not breathe, but he stayed conscious. Marines were trained to resist electrical weapons and torture. Jake had been shocked before during training. It hurt terribly, but he knew it would not kill him if he stayed calm. The guards were shocked too, but for a different reason. Most species would be unconscious or dead from that much energy. Jake was hurt, but he was still awake, still staring at them with defiant eyes. "Impossible," the guard leader said. "No one can take full power and stay conscious." Jake forced himself to sit up even though his whole body felt like it was on fire. He looked directly at the guard leader and said, "That the best you got?" The three dragons made sounds Jake had never heard before. Low, rumbling noises that made the walls vibrate. Their scales were turning bright red and orange, colors Jake now knew meant extreme anger. Vorthak took a step toward the energy barrier, and for a moment Jake thought the big dragon might try to break through it. "Easy," Jake said quietly to his friends. "Not yet. Not the right time." The dragons heard him and stepped back. But they kept making those angry, rumbling sounds. The guards looked nervous. They had never seen the dragons this angry before. "Why did you do that, human?" the guard leader demanded. "That dragon is not your friend. It will eat you when it gets hungry enough." Jake slowly stood up, still shaking from the energy weapons. "That dragon has more honor than you do. At least he fights enemies his own size." The guard leader's face twisted with rage. He raised his weapon again, but another guard stopped him. "Commander Crick still wants the human alive," the second guard said. "For the arena fights next week." Arena fights. That was new information and Jake filed it away for later. The guards left, but the guard leader promised Jake that next time would be worse. When they were alone again, Vorthak approached Jake carefully. The big dragon's scales were still flickering red and orange, but his eyes were different now. Respectful. Amazed. "You took pain for me," Vorthak said in his deep voice. "Why?" "Because that's what friends do," Jake said simply. "We protect each other." Morthul made a sound that Jake now recognized as dragon laughter, but there was no humor in it. "In 10 years no one protect us. No one take pain for us. You are small human, but you have big spirit." Gendrix came over and very gently touched Jake's shoulder with one clawed finger. "You are pack leader now," he said. "We follow you." Jake looked at the three dragons and realized something important had changed. They were not just cellmates anymore, they were not just friends. They were a team and he was their leader. "If I'm your leader," Jake said, "then we need to start planning. Tell me everything you know about this place. Guard schedules, weak points, other prisoners, everything." For the rest of the day, the dragons shared 10 years' worth of observations about Kepler Station. They had been watching and listening the whole time, even when they seemed hopeless. Jake took mental notes of everything, building a picture of the prison in his mind. Outside the cell, Warden Crixtall watched the security monitors with growing worry. The human had done something no one expected. He had turned 3 broken, defeated prisoners back into warriors. And now they were planning something. Crixtall made a decision. The arena fights would happen sooner than planned, before this human could cause any more trouble. Jake woke up to the sound of screaming. It was coming from somewhere else in the prison, echoing through the metal walls. He sat up quickly and saw the 3 dragons were already awake, their ears pointed toward the sound. "What's happening?" Jake asked. Morthal's scales flickered dark blue, which Jake had learned meant sadness. "Other prisoners tried to escape last night. From the sounds, it did not go well." The screaming continued for several minutes, then stopped suddenly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. Jake had heard that kind of silence before, in war zones after battles were over. A few hours later, Warden Crixtall appeared outside their cell with a large group of guards. His yellow eyes were bright with anger, and his claws were extended. Jake could see dried blood on the warden's uniform. 15 prisoners tried to escape last night," Crixtall announced. "They thought they could overpower my guards and steal a transport ship. They were wrong." Jake kept his face blank, but inside he was taking notes. 15 prisoners working. Together meant there were more people in this prison than he had thought. It also meant there were transport ships somewhere on the station. "The escape attempt has forced me to change my plans," Crixtall continued. "The arena fights will happen today instead of next week. All prisoners need to see what happens to those who think they can defy the Zephyrian Empire." 2 guards wheeled in a cart full of weapons and armor. But these were not weapons for Jake and the dragons to use. They were weapons for their opponents. "You will face our security drones in combat," Crixtall explained. "These are military-grade machines designed to kill enemy soldiers. They have energy weapons, armor plating, and combat programming that has been tested in real wars." Jake looked at the weapons on the cart. Energy rifles, plasma cannons, and something that looked like a portable missile launcher. All of it would be used against them. "How many drones?" Jake asked. Crixtall smiled, showing his sharp teeth. 6. That should be enough to provide a good show before you die." After the guards left, Jake gathered his 3 friends around him. "We need to talk about what's going to happen in there." "We will fight," Vorthak said simply. "We will die with honor." "No," Jake said firmly. "We're not going to die, we're going to win. But I need you to trust me completely, can you do that?" The 3 dragons looked at each other, then back at Jake. "We trust you," Gendrick said. "You are our leader." Jake spent the next few hours explaining his plan. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it could work. The dragons listened carefully and asked good questions. They were learning to think like human soldiers. When the guards came to take them to the arena, Jake was ready. They were escorted through long corridors filled with other prisoners watching from behind energy barriers. Jake saw dozens of different alien species, all looking hopeless and defeated. But when they saw him walking confidently with the 3 dragons following him, some of them stood up straighter. The arena was a large circular room with metal walls and a high ceiling. Hundreds of Zephyrians sat in seats around the arena, waiting to watch the fight. In the center of the floor were 6 combat drones, each one the size of a small car and covered in armor plating. "Citizens of the Empire," Crixtall's voice boomed over loudspeakers. "Today you will see why no one escapes from Kepler Station. These prisoners thought they could challenge our authority. Now they will face the consequences." The arena floor opened and Jake and the dragons were pushed inside. The crowd cheered as the energy barriers sealed them in with the combat drones. Jake looked around quickly, memorizing the layout. The arena walls were smooth metal with no handholds, but there were drainage grates in the floor and ventilation shafts near the ceiling. More importantly, there were maintenance panels built into the walls for repairs. The combat drones activated with electronic beeping sounds. Their weapons charged up with whining noises that made Jake's teeth hurt. Red targeting lasers swept across the arena floor looking for targets. "Remember the plan," Jake said quietly to his friends. "Wait for my signal." The first drone fired, an energy beam at Vorthak. The big dragon rolled to the side just like Jake had taught him, and the beam hit the wall where he had been standing, leaving a scorch mark in the metal. Jake ran toward the nearest maintenance panel, dodging energy, beams and plasma bolts. The crowd cheered, thinking he was running away in panic. They had no idea what he was really doing. The maintenance panel was locked, but Jake had made a lockpick from pieces of metal in their cell. His marine training included breaking into enemy facilities, and Zephyrian locks were not that different from human ones. While Jake worked on the panel, the three dragons kept the drones busy. They moved in coordinated patterns, just like Jake had taught them. When one dragon was targeted, the other two would attack from different directions, forcing the drones to split their attention. Jake got the maintenance panel open and found what he was looking for. The arena's power and control systems were right there, protected only by a thin metal cover. He ripped the cover off and studied the wiring inside. A plasma bolt exploded near his head, singeing his hair. One of the drones had noticed what he was doing and was trying to stop him, but Gendrix charged the drone from behind, knocking it over with his shoulder. "Now!" Jake shouted. All three dragons moved at once. Instead of fighting the drones, they grabbed them and held them in place. The drones struggled and fired their weapons, but they could not aim properly while being held. Jake found the main power cable and cut it with his makeshift knife. Half the arena's lights went out, and three of the drones stopped working completely. But that was not the real plan. Jake reconnected the power cable to a different system, one that controlled the arena's defenses. Suddenly, the energy barriers that kept prisoners out of the arena started flickering and failing. The crowd of Zephyrians began to panic as they realized something was wrong. Some of them started running for the exits. The three remaining drones were still dangerous, but now they were confused. Their targeting systems were getting interference from Jake's electrical sabotage. When they fired, their shots went wide or hit each other instead of their intended targets. Vorthak grabbed one of the disabled drones and threw it at another one. The impact sent both drones crashing into the arena wall. Morthul breathed a stream of superheated plasma at the last drone, melting its armor and shutting it down permanently. In less than 5 minutes, all 6 military-grade combat drones were destroyed. The crowd fell silent, staring in shock at the small human who had somehow turned certain death into victory. But Jake was not done. He had learned something important during the fight. The arena's systems were connected to the rest of the prison, and now he had access to those systems. Jake looked up at Warden Crixtal, who was staring down at him with disbelief and growing fear. "Your turn," Jake said. Jake worked fast on the arena's control systems while chaos spread through the spectator seats. Zephyrian guards were trying to restore order, but the crowd was panicking. They had never seen their perfect combat drones defeated so easily. "What are you doing?" Vorthak asked, keeping watch while Jake's hands moved quickly through the wiring. "Winning the war," Jake replied. He found the communication system and connected it to the main prison network. Now he could talk to every prisoner in the facility. Jake grabbed the arena's microphone and his voice echoed through every cell block in Kepler Station. "This is Jake Murphy, United Earth Marines. I'm talking to every prisoner who can hear my voice. The guards told you escape was impossible. They lied." In cell blocks throughout the station, hundreds of alien prisoners looked up at speakers they had ignored for years. A human voice was speaking to them, strong and confident. "In 30 minutes, all cell doors will open," Jake continued. "When they do, you have a choice. You can stay in your cells and remain slaves forever. Or you can fight for your freedom. The choice is yours." Warden Crixtal was screaming orders at his guards, but Jake could see the fear in the warden's yellow eyes. The Zephyrians had built their empire by making other species believe they were too powerful to resist. Now a single human was proving them wrong. Jake turned back to the control panel. His marine training had included basic electrical engineering, But this alien technology was more complex than anything he had worked with before. Fortunately, the three dragons had been watching the guards work on these systems for 10 years. Red wire controls doors, Morthul said helpfully. Blue wire controls weapons systems. Green wire controls life support. You've been paying attention, Jake said with approval. He carefully rewired the system so that all the prison doors would open at once, but the guards' weapons would stop working. Gendrix was watching the spectator area where Zephyrian civilians were still trying to escape. Many ships in the docking bay, he reported. I see them through the windows. Perfect. Jake had been hoping the arena was connected to the main docking area. Now he knew how they were going to escape. The arena's energy barriers suddenly flickered, back to life, trapping Jake and the dragons inside. Emergency lights started flashing and alarm sounds filled the air. Krixtal had regained control of some systems. Clever human. Krixtal's voice came through the speakers. But you cannot escape from here. I have sealed all the doors and called for reinforcements. In 1 hour, a battleship will arrive with enough firepower to destroy this entire station, if necessary. Jake smiled. Krixtal was making the same mistake that many enemies had made when fighting humans. He was thinking like a Zephyrian instead of thinking like Jake. Morthul, Jake said quietly. How hot can your fire breath get? The old dragon's eyes lit up with understanding. Hot enough to melt steel. Good. Vorthak, how strong are you and Gendrix together? Strong enough to break through most walls, the big dragon replied. Jake pointed at a section of the arena wall that looked different from the rest. That's not a wall. That's an emergency exit that leads directly to the docking bay. The Zephyrians built it so they could escape quickly if there was ever a prison riot. The three dragons looked at each other and grinned, showing their sharp teeth. They were beginning to think like humans, too. Morthul breathed a stream of superheated plasma at the emergency exit while Vorthak and Gendrix hit it with their combined strength. The metal began to glow and bend. After a few minutes, it gave way completely. Cool air rushed into the arena from the docking bay beyond. Jake could see rows of Zephyrian ships, including several large transports that could carry many passengers. Time to go, Jake said. They climbed through the hole in the wall and found themselves in the station's main docking area. It was full of Zephyrian ships of all sizes, from small fighters to large cargo vessels. But more importantly, it was full of confused guards who had no idea what was happening. Jake's rewiring had worked perfectly. Throughout the station, cell doors were opening, and prisoners were walking free for the first time in years. The guards' energy weapons were not working, leaving them armed only with basic tools. A group of 6 Zephyrian guards spotted Jake and the dragons and charged toward them with metal clubs. Jake sighed. They still did not understand what they were dealing with. The fight was over in seconds. The dragons had been warriors long before they were prisoners, and 10 years of captivity had not made them weak. The guards found themselves facing opponents who were bigger, stronger, faster, and much more angry than they had expected. Don't kill them, Jake ordered, as Vorthak held one guard in the air by his uniform. We're not like them. More prisoners began arriving in the docking bay. Jake saw dozens of different alien species all looking around in wonder at their first taste of freedom. Some were warriors like the dragons. Others were peaceful traders and explorers who had been captured during Zephyrian raids. Everyone listen. To me, Jake called out in a voice that carried across the entire docking bay. We have about 40 minutes before enemy reinforcements arrive. We need to work together if we want to get out of here alive. A tall, thin alien with blue skin and 4 arms stepped forward. Why should we follow a human? He asked. We do not even know you. Before Jake could answer, Vorthak moved to stand beside him. This human freed us when freedom seemed impossible, the big dragon said in a voice that rumbled like thunder. This human took pain to protect us. This human turned defeat into victory. If you want to live, you follow him. Morthul and Gendrix moved to Jake's other side, showing their support. Soon other prisoners began nodding agreement. They had all heard about the human who tamed dragons and defeated combat drones. Jake quickly organized the prisoners into groups. The warriors would secure the ships and defend against guards. The technical specialists would help pilot unfamiliar Zephyrian vessels. The others would help with loading supplies and coordinating the escape. In the distance, Jake could see Warden, Crystal, and a group of heavily armed guards approaching. The Warden was carrying a large energy weapon that Jake recognized as a military assault rifle. "This ends now, human," Crystal shouted. "You think you are so clever, but you are trapped here with nowhere to run." Jake looked around at the hundreds of freed prisoners, the dozens of available ships, and his 3 dragon friends who would follow him into any battle. Then he looked back at Crystal and smiled. "You're right about one thing," Jake said. "This does end now. But you're wrong about who's trapped." Crystal raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Gendrix breathed a stream of plasma that melted the gun in the Warden's hands. Crystal screamed and dropped the useless metal. "You made one mistake," Jake told the Warden as prisoners began boarding ships all around them. "You thought humans were just another species to conquer, but we're not. We're the species that turns other species into winners." 20 minutes later, a fleet of stolen Zephyrian ships launched from Kepler Station. Jake stood on the bridge of the largest transport, watching through the windows as they flew toward freedom. Beside him, Forthak worked the navigation controls with surprising skill. "Where do we go now?" Morthal asked. Jake thought about the dragon homeworld, hidden in caves and mountains, while Zephyrian hunters searched for survivors. He thought about human colonies that needed defending. He thought about all the other species suffering under Zephyrian rule. "We go home," Jake said. "All of us. And then we teach the galaxy something the Zephyrians forgot." "What is that?" Gendrix asked. Jake smiled as he watched the stars grow brighter ahead of them. "That humans don't just survive. We make sure everyone else can survive too." Behind them, Kepler Station grew smaller in the distance. Aboard the station, Warden Crystal stood in his empty prison and finally understood what he had unleashed. He had thought he was capturing a beast. Instead, he had awakened something far more dangerous. He had awakened hope.